A wife who does not bear a son is useless. My husband and in-laws forced me into a divorce, saying even being a woman had no value. Having my newborn daughter taken away, I had no choice but to comply with their demands. When I agreed to the divorce, my daughter and I were immediately thrown out of the house. Years later, having barely survived, my ex-husband appeared before me. "What, you're still alive? I bet you're groveling at your poor parents' home, living a miserable life, huh?" As usual, it seems all this man can do is put me down. "I remarried a daughter from a big farming family," he boasted. "My wife gave me a son, ensuring a secure future for our family. We are the winners, 100%. Aren't you jealous?" He laughed vulgarly. I asked him, which big farm family? He arrogantly shared the name and location of the farm, using his family as an example, telling me to climb up to their level if I could. Hearing the name and location of the farm, I remembered something. "Oh, that farm? Didn't you know? Actually, that farm's land is." After I revealed the truth, my ex-husband called me a delusional attention seeker. "Pathetic, a woman over 30, he ranted. Little did he know, a shocking fate awaited him and my former in-laws for discarding me like garbage. I am a married woman in my 30s. As the eldest of 3 sisters, I lived at home until I graduated from high school. I moved out to attend college for the convenience of commuting. After college, I started working and haven't returned home. In my mid-20s, through a friend's introduction, I met and married my husband. I told my parents about the man I wanted to marry, and we met. But my parents opposed our marriage. On the other hand, my husband also had reservations about my parents. He believed that as long as the parties involved agreed, there was no problem with getting married. So I went through with the marriage without reconciling with my parents or sisters. Since then, I have not been in contact with them. My poor parents and relatives, glad I don't have to deal with them." My ex-husband remarked. "You must be happy to have cut ties with your meddlesome parents too, right?" On the day I introduced my husband to my parents, my father arranged for us to meet in a private room at a traditional restaurant. My mother cherishes a handbag gifted by my father, carefully maintaining it and always carrying it for special occasions. It seems to be a sort of lucky charm for her. Before our meeting, she had even sent it off for repairs. However, my husband whispered to me that it looked poor. "That's an ugly bag. Its design is old-fashioned and reeks of the old era. I think it's more stylish to cherish and maintain what you love rather than being swayed by trends and discarding things after short use." However, my husband believed it was more important to follow the trends of the times. Due to this, I was glad to have lost contact with my parents and relatives, a sentiment my husband often expressed in the early days of our marriage. Shortly after our marriage, my husband moved into the apartment where I lived, starting our married life. However, within 6 months, we had to move in with his parents. My husband said it was important to save money for raising children, and I agreed. I got along well with my mother-in-law, so I thought living with my husband's family wouldn't be a problem. My husband's family has been employed by companies for generations, including his father and grandfather. His grandfather chose a public servant career, believing it to be the most stable. My father-in-law, unable to become a public servant, worked for a private company. My husband also worked for a company, albeit one less prestigious than where his father worked. The household income was lower than the average in the U.S., relying heavily on my father-in-law's salary, who was still working. Despite this, my in-laws strongly desired a male heir. A wife only proves her worth by giving birth to an heir for her in-laws. Make sure the first grandchild is a boy. thinking how outdated it was to require a male child as an heir. I felt strongly about this as I am a sister myself, believing in male superiority and that women are useless without a son. I had a bad feeling about my mother-in-law's views. Still, for almost a year into our marriage, my husband and I were drifting, relying on luck because I was still working. I thought if I could get pregnant by 30, that would be fine. But my mother-in-law thought differently. When are you planning to end your honeymoon phase? It's common sense to have children in your 20s. Who knows what disabilities a child born from an older mother could have? She claimed my working was preventing my husband from fully committing to starting a family. Then, without my knowledge, she submitted my resignation. Of course, I was shocked when my boss told me that my mother-in-law had submitted my resignation. But my boss quickly agreed, saying, "If you want children, it can't be helped." My boss believed that the greatest happiness and duty of a woman is to get married and raise children. He frequently made statements that could cause serious issues if heard by the concerned parties, such as unmarried women devoted to their careers lacking charm. Working under such a boss, I'd likely face pressure about when I was having children or to take early maternity leave because it's nice women can work just until they're ready to sit at home. Indeed, someone had already resigned due to his remarks. Despite my discomfort, I resigned to avoid conflict with my mother-in-law. She then demanded I take my basal body temperature and time my ovulation to ensure pregnancy. My efforts didn't align with her schemes. "Are you sure you're doing your part? You're not using birth control, are you?" My mother-in-law started to suspect that I didn't want to get pregnant and was intentionally avoiding it. I do want children. However, I do not insist on having a son as she does. Then, my father-in-law, who had been quiet until now, suggested that the problem might be with me. He mentioned he had heard that issues with not getting pregnant usually lie with the woman, and he urged me to get tested immediately. The results showed there was nothing wrong with my health. I suspected the problem might lie with my husband, but my father-in-law adamantly defended him, insisting a man could not be the issue, citing outdated beliefs that men have upheld America. I was made out to be the useless one, the bad actor in this. My family has always had sons born first. The wives who married into our family were all capable. It's a shame my son ended up with a mismatched wife. We went to a church known for blessings of fertility, where we prayed and participated in purification rituals. We bought charms and desperately hoped for a sign of pregnancy, but there was none. My in-laws meant well, but to me, it was nothing but pressure. I asked my husband to let nature take its course and give it more time, but he wouldn't listen. 2 years of marriage and no child? It's a disgrace, almost as if my husband is infertile, they despaired. Instead of understanding, he pressured me even more, telling me to try harder for his sake. As there were no signs of pregnancy, our relationship began to deteriorate. He started coming home late, and every weekend he returned drunk, reducing our attempts to conceive. Honestly, I was relieved. Being physically intimate with my husband out of obligation on weekends and ovulation days was exhausting. His late returns also meant less blaming from my in-laws, which calmed my mind. One day, my husband came home in a good mood after a long time and initiated intimacy. Weeks after our rare encounter, feeling unwell, I visited a doctor and discovered I was finally pregnant. I returned to my in-laws' house, light-footed with the news. It was a pregnancy at the edge of my 20s, after 4 years of marriage. With the pregnancy confirmed, my mother-in-law's attitude changed drastically. She became incredibly kind, and my household chores were significantly reduced. It was a pampered and careful 9 months. When it was time to find out the baby's sex, my in-laws hadn't asked me to check. So I looked forward to the surprise at birth. They believed I would have a boy based on my strong features. However, when the time came, I gave birth to a girl. My in-laws had opposed having my husband in the delivery room, believing men shouldn't attend births, so his presence was not there. I wished he could have been by my side, but faced with his parents' opposition, he seemed almost relieved. The meticulous care from my mother-in-law during pregnancy meant I suffered less from pregnancy symptoms than expected. As my belly grew, walking and shopping alone became difficult, and I asked my husband to drive me, which he did, but he never helped carry the groceries. It seemed as if he thought his duty ended with planting the seed. I sensed that raising our child would be a challenging endeavor. And so, my husband and in-laws waited outside the delivery room, anxious for the news. The birth was not only delayed but also difficult, and I felt very vulnerable. I worried I might not hear my baby's cry, but when I did, the baby's sex didn't matter anymore. "Thank you for being born healthy," was all I could think. Yet, when the nurse announced, "It's a healthy baby girl," my in-laws exploded beside my exhausted self. I didn't want a granddaughter. Girls are just a burden. Eventually going to another man's house. A useless wife. Do you want to end our family line? Do you have a grudge against our family finances? Do you want to shame my son as the man who couldn't produce a successor? My ex-husband chimed in. Their noisy complaints filled my ears. Don't they understand childbirth is a life-risking effort? I thought, too tired to respond. All I wanted was to be left to sleep. Yet, my father-in-law claimed that because I came from a family of 3 sisters, I was destined to only produce girls. He accused me of deceiving them with my female-only lineage. From now on, don't think of yourself as a wife. Work like a servant, you don't need maternity leave, he said as he dragged me out of bed. Stopped by a nurse who heard the commotion, he threw out a parting shot. "You only get today to rest," and left the room. My mother-in-law and husband followed him out. Despite the impossibility of discharging the day after birth. When I was finally allowed to leave the hospital and return to my in-laws' house, my belongings had been removed from my room. "A servant doesn't need a room, just curl up in a corner," my father-in-law declared. I rented a storage unit for my belongings, hoping that by doing housework and raising my child flawlessly, my in-laws would eventually understand. Staying in a corner of the room didn't bother me, but it was difficult with a newborn daughter. I begged my in-laws to at least let her sleep inside the room. They agreed to lend the space by the hour. I had some savings from my single years, so I decided to pay for the room time. However, they demanded additional fees for the baby's crying and the inconvenience of disposable diapers. My daughter often cried at the sound of my in-laws shouting, and they grew increasingly irritable, calling her charmless. I became unsure how to reconcile. Without anyone to consult and rarely leaving the house due to housework and childcare, I felt isolated. Then, one day, my husband's affair came to light, orchestrated by my in-laws. Unusually, my mother-in-law suggested that my daughter and I should go for a walk in the park. If I had been calm, I might have suspected something was amiss. However, worn out as I was, I took her suggestion and relaxed in the park, eager for a change of scenery. While we were out, my mother-in-law called, claiming an emergency with my husband and asked us to return. When I arrived, I found him laughing with an unknown woman and my in-laws eating luxury meal. You couldn't get pregnant easily. So I introduced him to a girl who seems like she could pop out kids easily. She had casually mentioned my struggles to a friend, leading to a conversation about setting up my husband with her daughter. They hit it off, and my in-laws intensified their criticism and nitpicking to drive me out, especially after finding out I was pregnant. But they continued the relationship, thinking if a son was born, all would be well. If not, they had a backup plan. The child born is a girl and useless. Since I had not given birth to a son, I was deemed useless. And they concocted various schemes to drive me out. Instead of running away, I endured and persevered. So reluctantly, they forced a divorce with his affair partner present. I want to divorce you. Your presence worsens my parents' mood, and it makes our home tense, doesn't it? As I stood dumbfounded by his selfish words, my father-in-law snatched my daughter from my arms. He threatened to throw her into the yard if I didn't sign the divorce papers, making a throwing gesture. I screamed with all my might to stop him. I think it was the loudest I've ever yelled in my life. With no other options, I silently signed the divorce papers. My ex-husband tossed a thin bank envelope at my feet, calling it severance pay. As I picked them up, my husband and in-laws sneered and laughed mockingly. I endured the humiliation and bitterness. I bit my lips so hard that I tasted blood in my mouth. My husband's affair partner seemed unfazed by the situation, even appearing smug. With nowhere to go, I had no choice but to turn to my estranged parents. I could have managed alone, but with a newborn daughter, it felt daunting to go on by myself. I had almost nothing to start with. They kept finding reasons to charge me extra fees. My husband refused to contribute financially to our daughter's expenses, telling me to figure it out myself if I wanted to raise her. I contacted my parents, asking if they could at least take in my daughter. When they asked where I was, they told me not to move from there. Shortly after, my father arrived, driving with my mother in the passenger seat. My father drove, my mother sat next to him, and my daughter and I were in the back seat. I began to share everything that had happened since my marriage. While I spoke, my parents listened silently without uttering a single word. The last thing I said was an apology for not even telling them about my daughter's birth, asking if they could at least take her in. Then my mother said, "It must have been hard, you did well." My father bluntly told me to come back home. When we returned home, my sisters were still there. And my old room was just as I had left it after high school graduation. My father told me I could use that room as I liked. From the room preserved as I had left it, I deeply felt my parents' love. The floors and shelves were clean, and the blanket smelled faintly of the sun. My mother had been maintaining it for 12 years, ensuring I wouldn't be inconvenienced whenever I returned. I sensed my father's deep affection in his few words. Reflecting on it, I realized that my father, who had never opposed my decisions, had clearly said, "Not that man," when it came to my marriage. I asked why he had opposed it. I thought they might have conducted a background check without my knowledge. But that wasn't it. My mother said she didn't like speaking ill of others, but if she had to say something, it was because she thought he only looked at the surface. I remembered that during our initial meeting, my ex-husband had been overly concerned about my mother's handbag. He said those with good bags are wealthy, and those who care for old bags for a long time are poor. I regretted not listening to my parents' reasons for opposition and rashly cutting ties to marry. I apologized to my parents for acting selfishly and making a poor decision. 3 years have passed since I divorced and returned to my parents' home. Even though my parents welcomed me back, I cannot rely on them forever as a mother. These 3 years have been the most intense of my life. One day, I ran into my ex-husband, who was doing agricultural work locally. He looked very different from the man I knew. His skin was sunburnt and rough from lack of care. The man I had married had thought wearing nice things was a status symbol and, regardless of his personality, always took care in his appearance. Seeing him in ragged, dirty work clothes seemed almost surreal. He explained that his mother-in-law had instructed him to help out at his affair partner's family farm. My wife's family owns a large farm. She gave birth to a boy first, securing our family's future. I thought he would stop at bragging, but he then insulted me. You went back to your poor family, right? A divorced woman in her 30s with a kid, and your unmarried sisters must be quite the burden. Did you have to grovel to your miserly parents? How did that feel? He asked rudely. It's fine if he speaks ill of me. Getting upset over such a despicable man's words would be a waste of time and effort. But I couldn't forgive him for speaking ill of my parents and sisters, who had warmly welcomed me back. I knew of the farm he mentioned. I asked him, which farm is that? He claimed it was the largest landholder in the area. Unknown to him, my family had historically leased land for profit. Going back through my father's family tree, it seems we had an influential ancestor who managed this area. This ancestor lived frugally, aligned with the villagers. And my father's family had continued to live modestly according to that tradition. That's why our family home is just a normal, old two-story house. Since returning home, I've been helping my father with his business while raising my daughter. I discovered that the parents of my ex-husband's affair partner were involved in my father's business. I told my ex-husband that the farm was actually leasing land from my parents. He exploded, accusing me of lying. Your mother has only an old bag, and her clothes at the greeting were outdated. You must be poor if you can't afford new clothes for your daughter's departure, he ranted in panic. I told him I wasn't idle enough to come to the agricultural cooperative just to lie. I was there for my family's rental business. Our family owns not just farmland but also apartments and buildings. A well-known company's branch is in one of our buildings. A real estate magnate known to anyone living in the area for a long time. Initially, my younger sister was set to take over the family business when I got married. But during the 4 years I was married, she found her own path. That's when I returned. Having always been interested in my father's work, I decided to take over after him. My middle sister is now pursuing her dreams, working hard after moving out. As I explained this, my ex-husband still didn't believe me, calling it lies and fantasies. If you're going to say that, how about this? I remarried an old friend, I told him. When I showed my wedding ring, my ex-husband's face contorted. I don't mean to brag, but my current husband treats my daughter from a previous relationship as his own. The apartment on the land my father let me manage on a trial basis became popular quickly. After my husband and I added our ideas. It was an old apartment with many vacancies and considered out of date. But now it's popular among young couples and considered ideal for raising children. My ex-husband, unaware of such a change, confronted me aggressively. You tricked me. Acting all poor. No, you're the one who assumed I was poor. Let go. I tried to push his hand away, but he only gripped harder. He even pulled my hair, which prompted someone who noticed the commotion to call for security. A few men tried to help me, but my ex-husband resisted fiercely, even biting them. A burly security guard appeared, and my ex-husband hesitated for a moment, which was enough for him to be subdued and taken outside. Later, my ex-husband contacted me. Thinking it was an apology for his previous behavior, I answered the phone. But he was actually begging for money. He explained that his mother-in-law had fallen victim to a termite scam and had been swindled out of a significant amount of money, causing financial hardship. They tried to borrow money using their family home as collateral. But his father-in-law had retired early after passing on the family leadership to him because a successor was born. It seems he was also swindled out of his retirement funds. My ex-husband couldn't cover the expenses for 2 households on his income alone. And, too proud to admit his financial incapacity, he embezzled company funds and got caught, resulting in his dismissal. Not only was he fired, but he was also required to repay the full amount he embezzled. The parents of his affair partner ended up covering for him. My ex-husband and his parents lost everything, and were working off their debt at the affair partner's family farm. Even though they worked, their wages were seized to repay the debt, leaving them physically and mentally devastated. He said it was a living hell, with their marrow being sucked dry. He begged my parents to pay off his remaining debt. Please save us from this hardship. You're our only hope. Which right do you have to say that? I clenched my fist tightly to control my anger. My nails dug into my palm, causing pain. It felt like the pain in my hand was keeping my rage in check. Even when I begged for help, you cared only about your public image and didn't help. I don't think there's any value in helping people who judge others only by their appearances. I firmly declined his request, thinking it was a good opportunity for him to understand what it feels like to be oppressed. I also told him not to contact me anymore, since I didn't expect him to take it seriously. I blocked his number on my smartphone and home phone. Then he started lurking around the agricultural cooperative and even ambushed me. Security personnel, recognizing him, chased him away. But since he vaguely remembered where my parents' house was, he also lay in wait there. He hid when my parents or husband were around but confronted me alone, threatening to keep following me until I gave him money. This behavior eventually became known at the cooperative, and my parents heard about it, suggesting I file a police report. However, I preferred to avoid involving the police, as anyone in business might understand. I wanted to settle things amicably, without holding any grudges, even against those at fault. It may be true that I'm looked down upon because of that. However, as a person, I would prefer to live without conflict. Then, my parents lodged a complaint with the parents of the daughter from the farming family who had taken my ex-husband from me. My parents told them, "Your son-in-law is our daughter's ex-husband, and your daughter took him from our daughter. Now he is begging our daughter for money. His lurking and following her around is causing a great nuisance. I hear that bad rumors about him have spread around the agricultural cooperative. Please take responsibility and handle this," they said quite sternly. Upon learning the truth, the affair partner's parents apologized, admitting they had done something terrible without knowing I was the daughter of a landowner. Later, the daughter who had been the affair partner came to apologize to me, accompanied by her parents. She expressed shame for having believed, and sided with my ex-mother-in-law's suggestions to drive me out. I told her that words are easy to say, so if she truly felt sorry, I asked her to strictly discipline my ex-husband and ensure he does not contact me unless it's work-related. I also asked her to ensure that he does not involve himself with me outside of work. Although we're currently connected through our parents, I knew we would eventually have to interact in our generation. I didn't want a casual relationship. I wanted a clear separation, strictly for work purposes. Later, I heard that the affair partner's parents severely reprimanded my ex-husband, even confiscating his room, similar to what he had done to me. He was now living crammed with his parents-in-law in a corner of a tool shed. Eventually, my ex-mother-in-law was ostracized by the parents of the affair partner, after being caught secretly harvesting and selling crops. She blamed their hunger on them, which led to further discord. Unwilling to forgive the debt, they decided to loan her out to a known, quirky old couple who hated dishonesty. The old couple re-educated her quite harshly after learning what she had done. Thanks to that, I heard she had become as thin as a skeleton. When I go to the cooperative, I hear various rumors, but eventually, I stopped hearing about my ex-husband and his family. It seems the parents of the affair partner renewed their lease on the land. So they likely continued farming. The fact that I no longer hear rumors about my ex-husband suggests they are keeping their promise to supervise him strictly. The following year after this ordeal, I became pregnant with my current husband. We had a son, but I vowed not to raise him with the expectation that a son must take over everything. My husband shows equal love and care to both our daughter and son. My daughter seems to have matured a bit, taking on the role of an older sister. With support from my parents, my son is growing up in a nurturing environment. My middle sister is still pursuing her dreams and seldom visits home. My youngest sister recently met someone nice and started talking about marriage. My parents are still far from retirement, continuing to work diligently. We live fully in the present, feeling that our happiness depends on our efforts. I want to live without forgetting this feeling.
I stared at my phone, reading the text message for the 5th time, my hands trembling slightly. I know what you're hiding, Maren. We should talk before Everett finds out. My mother-in-law's words glowed accusingly on the screen. My name is Maren, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought the worst thing about my relationship with my mother-in-law was her constant reminders about my food allergies. You know, the subtle jabs about how complicated I make family dinners, or how Everett's ex-girlfriend Camille could eat anything without making a fuss. I was standing in our kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, when the message arrived. The coffee I'd been sipping turned bitter in my mouth. What could Lorna possibly think she knew about me? I'd always been an open book, sometimes to a fault. Hey, beautiful. Everett's voice made me jump. I quickly locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, and I forced myself to relax into his embrace. You okay? You seem tense. Just your mom being? Your mom, I said, trying to keep my voice light. She wants to talk. Everett's arms stiffened slightly. What about? She didn't say. The lie felt heavy on my tongue, but I needed time to figure this out. Probably another lecture about cross-contamination in her kitchen. He sighed, his breath warm against my neck. I'll talk to her again about the allergy thing. She needs to understand it's not a choice you're making to be difficult. If only that were the real issue. I turned in his arms, studying his face, the kind eyes, the slight worry line between his brows that appeared whenever his mother came up in conversation. Remember when we first started dating, and you told me your mom was a bit protective? He laughed. Understatement of the century? Just a bit. I managed to smile, but my mind was racing. What could Lorna possibly think she had on me? I never cheated, never lied about anything important. The only secret I kept was, but no, she couldn't know about that. Nobody knew about that. My phone buzzed again. Everett reached for it, but I snatched it first. Sorry, probably work, I said, stepping away. His expression flickered with confusion at my sudden movement. Another message from Lorna. I'm coming over this afternoon. We can discuss the photo I found while cleaning out the attic. My blood ran cold. The attic, where Walter, my father-in-law, had stored boxes of old family photos, including ones from before I met Everett. Before I changed my name. Before I became the person I am today. I need to run some errands, I said quickly, already grabbing my purse. I'll pick up dinner on my way home? Maren? Everett's voice stopped me at the door. You'd tell me if something was really wrong, right? I looked back at my husband, the man who'd loved me unconditionally for the past 5 years, who'd chosen me despite his mother's constant comparisons to perfect Camille, who didn't know that the woman he married had reinvented herself long before we met. Of course, I lied again, hating myself for it. Everything's fine. As I drove away, my phone kept buzzing with messages I couldn't bear to read. Lorna had finally found the ammunition she'd been looking for since the day Everett brought me home. The question was, what would she do with it? The truth about my past wasn't just my secret to keep. It was my survival story. And I'd be damned if I'd let Lorna twist it into something ugly. But first, I needed to know exactly what she'd found in that attic. I pulled into Lorna and Walter's driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. The familiar colonial house loomed before me, its pristine white exterior masking the tension that always lurked inside. I'd driven here instead of running errands, knowing I needed to face this head-on. Walter's truck wasn't in the driveway. Small mercies. At least I'd only have to deal with Lorna. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Lorna stood there in her perfectly pressed slacks and cashmere sweater, a manila envelope in her hands. "I wasn't expecting you so soon," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But I'm glad you came." The formal living room felt cold despite the summer heat outside. Family photos lined the walls, dozens of them tracking Everett's life. I noticed, not for the first time, how many included Camille. 8 years of dating captured in frozen moments, while my 5 years of marriage warranted only 2 frames. "Would you like some tea?" Lorna asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I bought those special allergen-free cookies you can eat. Though I suppose that was unnecessary, wasn't it?" My stomach clenched. "What exactly do you think you know, Lorna?" She set the envelope on the coffee table between us. "I was cleaning the attic last weekend. Walter's been after me for months to organize all those old boxes." She paused, studying my face. "I found something interesting in his old case files. Walter's career as a private investigator. Of course. I should have known he'd have access to that kind of information. Whatever you found." "Sarah Mitchell," Lorna said quietly, and my world tilted. "That was your name before, wasn't it? Before you became Maren Collins." I heard voices in the foyer, Walter's deep rumble and, to my horror, Everett's familiar tone. My hands started shaking. "Mom," Everett called out. "Your car's not in the garage," but the door was open. He stopped short in the living room doorway, Walter right behind him. "Maren, what are you doing here?" "Perfect timing," Lorna said, reaching for the envelope. "We were just about to look at some interesting photographs." Walter stepped forward, his face darkening. "Lorna, don't. She's been lying to our son for years, Walter. He deserves to know who he really married." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Everett moved to stand beside my chair, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I stood up, shrugging off his touch. "I can explain." "Can you?" Lorna pulled out a newspaper clipping. "Can you explain why Sarah Mitchell disappeared 10 years ago, right after her father's arrest for running a Ponzi scheme that ruined hundreds of lives? Or why she emerged 3 years later as Maren Collins, with a convenient list of life-threatening allergies that make her seem so fragile and in need of protection?" "That's enough," Walter snapped, but the damage was done. Everett stared at me, his face unreadable. "Maren, I changed my name legally," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I didn't do anything wrong. My father did terrible things, yes. But I helped the investigation. I'm the one who turned him in." "After taking your share?" Lorna pressed. "The money that disappeared with Sarah Mitchell was returned to the victims," Walter cut in. "All of it. I know because I worked the case." He turned to his wife, disgust evident in his expression. "Which you knew when you found my files. You just chose to leave that part out." The silence that followed was deafening. Everett hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. I couldn't bear to look at him. "I think," Walter said quietly, "you should leave, Lorna.
Take a drive.
Think about what you're doing to this family." "I'm protecting this family," she insisted, but her voice wavered. "No." Everett finally spoke, his tone ice cold. "You're destroying it. And if you ever try to hurt Maren again, you'll lose me too." I felt his hand slip into mine, warm and steady. But as we walked out together, leaving Lorna standing alone in her perfect living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She'd exposed my past, yes, but she didn't know everything. And the parts she didn't know? Those were the ones that could really tear this family apart. The next morning, I found Walter sitting alone at the local diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He didn't seem surprised when I slid into the booth across from him. The breakfast crowd's chatter provided a buffer of white noise around us, making it feel safer to talk. You knew, I said quietly. All this time, you knew who I was. He pushed a manila folder across the table, different from the one Lorna had yesterday. I kept copies of everything. Figured this day might come. He paused as the waitress refilled his cup. What Lorna doesn't know is that I've been watching her, too. I opened the folder and froze. Inside was a photo of Lorna having lunch with Camille, dated just last week. She's still in contact with her? More than that. Walter's face was grim. They've been plotting. Lorna's been feeding Camille information about your marriage, your medical conditions. They're trying to prove your allergies are fake. My hands started trembling. Why are you showing me this? Because my wife is about to do something stupid. He pulled out another document. She's hired a private investigator, not me, obviously, to dig deeper into your past. But she's not going to find what she thinks she will, is she? I stared at my reflection in the window, remembering the scared 19-year-old girl who discovered her father's crimes.
No.
She won't. The money that disappeared? Walter's voice was gentle. The part she thinks you stole? I know where it really went. I know what you did with it. You never told her? Wasn't my story to tell. He leaned forward. But maybe it's time you did. Before she does more damage trying to protect Everett from a threat that doesn't exist. My phone buzzed, a text from Everett. Mom just showed up at the house. Says she needs to talk to both of us. Where are you? She's moving faster than I thought, Walter muttered, reading the message over my shoulder. Maren, listen to me. Lorna's not just afraid of losing Everett. She's afraid of losing her identity as his protector. After what happened with Camille. What had happened with Camille? I asked. Everyone tiptoes around it, but nobody ever tells me the whole story. Walter's expression darkened. Camille nearly bankrupted Everett. Convinced him to invest in her brother's business venture. It was a scam, but she claimed she didn't know. Lorna had to remortgage their house to help him recover. That's why she's so paranoid about me being another con artist? I laughed bitterly. Ironic, considering my background. The difference is you exposed the con. You didn't profit from it. He pulled out one final document, a newspaper article I'd never seen before. It detailed how an anonymous source had helped return millions to the victims of my father's scheme. You gave up your inheritance to make things right.
My phone buzzed again.
Everett. Mom's saying something about proof. Please come home. I stood up, gathering the documents. I need to go. Maren. Walter caught my arm. There's something else you should know. About why Lorna's so fixated on Camille. He hesitated. Camille's pregnant. And she's claiming it's Everett's. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. They haven't been together in years. I know. But Lorna wants to believe it. Because if it's true, then she has a reason to push me out completely. I felt oddly calm, despite the bomb that had just been dropped. When did Camille tell her this? Yesterday morning, right before Lorna found my old case files about you. He gave me a meaningful look. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my bathroom drawer, the one I'd been too afraid to take. About how everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. Thank you, Walter, I said, already heading for the door, for showing me what I'm really up against. What are you going to do? I paused, thinking about the other secrets I'd been keeping, the ones that could either save my marriage or destroy it completely. I'm going to tell my husband the whole truth, before his mother and ex-girlfriend can twist it into something else. I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the pregnancy test I'd finally taken in the diner's bathroom. 2 pink lines.
Clear as day.
The irony of this timing wasn't lost on me, my news versus Camille's claim. But first, I had to deal with whatever scene was waiting inside. Lorna's Mercedes was parked in our driveway, looking as pristine and polished as its owner always did. Through the living room window, I could see her gesturing animatedly while Everett sat with his head in his hands. The moment I walked in, Lorna's voice cut through the tension. Finally. Now we can discuss Camille's situation like adults. There is no situation, Everett said, standing up. Camille and I haven't been together in years. This is ridiculous. She says differently. Lorna pulled out her phone. She has proof of a meeting 3 months ago. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, but I forced it back down. Let me guess, at the Cardinal Hotel bar? They both turned to look at me. Everett's face showed confusion, Lorna's triumph. How did you know that? She asked. I pulled out my own phone, finding the photo Walter had given me. Because I know about your weekly lunches with Camille. I know you've been plotting this together. I turned to Everett. 3 months ago, your mother arranged for Camille to accidentally run into you at that bar. But you never showed up, did you? I was with you, he said slowly. We were at the hospital. Your allergic reaction to the new medication, which your mother knew about, I added. She knew exactly where you'd be that night. Just like she knows my entire medical history now, thanks to the private investigator she hired. Lorna's face paled slightly. How did you? Walter told me everything. I placed the folder of documents on the coffee table, including what really happened with Camille and the investment scam. That's not relevant, Lorna snapped. It's completely relevant. I took a deep breath. Because you're so afraid of history repeating itself that you can't see what's really happening. Camille's lying about the pregnancy, Lorna. Just like she lied about not knowing her brother's business was a scam. Everett picked up the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he read. Mom, you've been meeting with her this whole time? Planning this? I was protecting you. No, he said quietly. You were trying to control me. Again. He looked up at me. What else haven't you told me? This was it. The moment to lay everything bare. Remember how I said I turned my father in? What I didn't tell you is why. I pulled out the final document Walter had given me. The money everyone thought I stole? I used it to repay his victims. All of it. Every penny I inherited, every asset I had. That's why I changed my name, not to hide, but to start over with nothing. Lorna grabbed the paper, her eyes widening as she read. This can't be. Your investigator won't find any hidden accounts or secret wealth, I continued. But he might find the thank you letters from the families I helped, or the testimony I gave that put my father away. I paused, my hand finally resting on my stomach. And now I need to protect my own family. Everett's eyes followed my movement, realization dawning on his face. Maren, I found out this morning, I said softly. Our baby deserves better than this endless suspicion and manipulation. So you need to choose, Everett. Both of you do. Lorna sank into the chair, the paper crumpling in her hands. You're pregnant.
Yes.
And unlike Camille's convenient claim, I can prove it. I turned to my husband. I love you, but I won't raise our child in this environment. Your mother needs help, Everett. Real help. Not enabling. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a car door slammed and Walter's voice called out. Lorna? Are you ready to tell them the real reason you're so desperate to keep Everett close? I watched the color drain from my mother-in-law's face, and I realized we were about to uncover yet another layer of this family's carefully constructed facade. Whatever came next would either heal us or break us completely. But at least now, with my own secret revealed, I could face it honestly for my child's sake, if nothing else. Walter's words hung in the air as he entered our living room. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but Lorna's face, that's what caught my attention. Pure fear, something I'd never seen from her before. Don't, she whispered to Walter.
Please.
The pregnancy dinner is tomorrow, Walter said, ignoring her plea. Were you planning to serve that special cake you ordered? The one with the almond flour? My blood ran cold. Everett stepped forward. Mom, it's a family recipe, Lorna said quickly. I wanted to make something traditional to celebrate. To celebrate? Walter pulled out a receipt. Like you celebrated when you ordered that cake for Maren's birthday last year? The one that mysteriously got mixed up with a nut-free version at the last minute. I remembered that day, how Lorna had seemed almost disappointed when I didn't take a bite. How she'd insisted it was safe, but Walter had intercepted the plate. You knew about my allergies, I said softly. You knew exactly what almond flour would do to me. And now, Walter continued, with a grandchild on the way, were you hoping to prove Maren's allergies were fake? Or were you hoping for something worse? Everett's face had gone pale. Dad, What are you saying? I'm saying your mother has been testing Marin's allergies for years. Small doses, watching for reactions. Like some twisted scientific experiment. The room started spinning. All those times I'd felt sick after family dinners, the mysterious reactions that didn't make sense. I had to know. Lorna burst out. Had to prove she was lying like everything else about her. You don't understand. I can't lose him again. Again? Everett's voice cracked. What are you talking about? Walter moved to stand beside his wife. Tell him, Lorna. Tell him about the baby you lost before Everett. About how it broke you so badly you couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. I watched understanding dawn on Everett's face. The brother you told me died of SIDS. That wasn't the whole story, was it? Lorna's composure crumbled. I was allergic to the medication they gave me during the pregnancy. The doctors didn't believe me when I said something was wrong. By the time they listened, she turned to me, her eyes wild. When Everett brought home another woman with mysterious allergies, claiming she needed special treatment, special care. You thought I was faking, I finished. Like you thought the doctors thought you were faking. I had to protect him. By poisoning his wife. Walter's voice was harsh. By trying to prove she's lying, even if it killed her. The doorbell rang, making us all jump. Through the window, I saw Camille standing on our porch, one hand resting demonstratively on her stomach. Perfect timing, I said, feeling strangely calm. Should we invite her in? Let her explain how she's supposedly carrying your child, Everett? Or should we skip straight to the part where your mother orchestrated this whole thing?
No.
Everett moved to block the door. No more manipulation. No more lies. He turned to his mother. You need help, Mom. Real help. Not whatever this is. I'm trying to save you. You're trying to control me. And now you're trying to hurt my wife, my pregnant wife, to prove some twisted point.
He pulled out his phone.
I'm calling Dr. Richards. The same psychiatrist who helped you after James died. Either you agree to get help or what? Lorna's voice was barely a whisper. Or you'll never meet your grandchild. The words seemed to physically pain him. Your real grandchild. The doorbell rang again. Outside, Camille was peering through the window, her face falling as she took in the scene. I placed a hand on my stomach, thinking about cycles of pain and protection, about how fear can twist love into something dangerous. The cake, I said quietly. The one for tomorrow's dinner. Where is it? Lorna's silence was answer enough. Because I'm thinking, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, that we should all have a slice. Together.
Right now.
And see who's really telling the truth about what's inside it. The cake sat in the middle of the dining room table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Lorna had retrieved it from her car, her hands shaking as she set it down. Camille still stood in the doorway, her fabricated pregnancy story forgotten in the tension of the moment. You first, Lorna, I said, cutting a slice. Show us how safe your family recipe is. This is ridiculous, she whispered, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Is it? Because I have my EpiPen right here. I placed it next to the plate. And I've already texted photos of this whole situation to my lawyer. So, if anything happens to me, I let the threat hang in the air. Everett grabbed my arm.
Madam, stop.
You're pregnant. We can't risk. Can't risk what? I pulled away from him. Can't risk proving that your mother has been slowly poisoning me for years? That she was planning to do it again, even knowing I'm carrying your child. I never meant to, Lorna started.
To what?
Kill me? Just make me sick enough to prove I'm lying? My voice cracked. Do you know what it feels like, Lorna? When your throat closes up. When you can't breathe, and every second feels like drowning? Walter stepped forward. I have the receipt from the bakery. The order specifically requested almond flour. Stop. Lorna's voice was barely audible. Please, just stop.
Why?
I picked up the knife again. Isn't this what you wanted? To expose the truth. Camille cleared her throat from the doorway. I should go.
No.
I pointed the knife at her. You're part of this too. The fake pregnancy story? That was supposed to be the backup plan, wasn't it? If the cake didn't work, I needed the money. Camille admitted quietly. Lorna said, "Enough." Everett's shout made us all jump. "This ends now. Mom, eat the cake." Lorna stared at her son, tears streaming down her face. "I lost one son. I couldn't lose another." "So, you tried to kill my wife instead?" "I just wanted proof." She grabbed the fork, hands trembling.
Fine.
"I'll show you." Everything happened in slow motion. Lorna lifted the fork to her mouth, but her hand was shaking so badly that crumbs fell onto her blouse. As she swallowed, her eyes went wide. "Mom?" Everett stepped toward her. Lorna's hand went to her throat. I can't breathe." Walter rushed to her side. "Lorna? What's wrong?" "The medication," she gasped. "My allergy to the new heart medication." My EpiPen clattered to the floor as realization hit. The same allergies she'd accused me of faking, she had them too. Different trigger, same result. "Call 911, Walter shouted, lowering Lorna to the floor as she struggled for breath. I grabbed my EpiPen and knelt beside her. "This will help, but it's going to hurt." Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw everything. The fear, the guilt, the desperate need to protect what she loved, even if it meant destroying it. I saw myself in a twisted way. How thin the line was between protection and destruction. The EpiPen clicked as I pressed it into her thigh. Lorna's body jerked, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered as the medication took effect. "I'm so sorry." Sirens wailed in the distance. Camille had disappeared, leaving the front door open. Everett stood frozen, watching his mother fight for breath on the floor, saved by the very person she'd tried to harm. "The baby," Lorna gasped. "Will you ever let me?" "That depends," I said, still holding her hand as the paramedics rushed in. "On whether you get help. Real help." As they loaded Lorna into the ambulance, I stared at the cake still sitting on the table. One bite had almost killed her. One bite would have killed me. The ultimate proof of truth, delivered in the cruelest way possible. Walter turned to me, his face aged 10 years in the last hour. "Why did you save her?" "Because," I said, watching the ambulance drive away, "sometimes the best revenge is forcing someone to live with what they've done." 3 days after the cake incident, I found myself sitting across from Lorna in the hospital's psychiatric ward. The room was stark white, making her look smaller, older somehow. The bruise from the EpiPen injection was still visible on her thigh. "Walter's leaving me," she said without preamble. Her voice was raw, whether from the allergic reaction or crying, I couldn't tell. "He's already packed his things." I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the slight swell that only I could detect so far. "Did you ever actually check the ingredients in that cake? Or did you just assume I was lying about my allergies, like you assumed everything else?" She flinched. I was so sure that I was manipulating Everett, using my allergies to control him. I leaned forward. "The way you used your grief over James to control your family? You don't understand what it's like to lose a child." "No, but I understand what it's like to lose everything else." I pulled out an old photograph, me as Sarah Mitchell, standing next to my father at a charity gala. When I turned him in, I lost my name, my family, my entire identity. But I did it because it was right. Lorna's hands trembled as she took the photo. "Why are you here, Marin?" "Because I need to know if you're capable of change. Real change. Not just for Everett's sake, or this baby's, but for yourself." A nurse appeared in the doorway with medication, but Lorna waved her away. "I don't deserve another chance." "Maybe not, but this isn't about what you deserve." I stood up, moving to leave. "It's about breaking the cycle." "Wait." Her voice cracked. "There's something else you need to know. About James. About what really happened." I sat back down slowly, watching her face crumple. The allergic reaction? It wasn't just the medication. I'd been taking risks, eating things I shouldn't, trying to prove I wasn't really allergic, that the doctors were wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I got pregnant, I kept doing it, kept testing my limits, until understanding dawned, horrible and clear. You blamed yourself for James's death. And then Everett brought you home, with your careful food checks and medical alerts, and all I could see was myself. My weakness. The same weakness that killed my baby. Tears streamed down her face. I had to prove you were faking. Had to prove it wasn't real. Because if your allergies were real, then you'd have to accept that yours were too, I finished. That James's death wasn't because you were weak, but because no one believed you. A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Everett stood there, his face ashen. Mom, how long have you been there? Lorna whispered. Long enough. He moved into the room, standing between us. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth about James? Because I killed him. My pride, my stupidity. No, I cut in sharply. The doctors killed him when they dismissed your symptoms. The same way you tried to dismiss mine. Silence filled a room, heavy with decades of unspoken pain. Finally, Everett spoke. I'm staying with Marin at her house. Walter's moving in with his brother. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But there's a treatment program in Vermont. 6 months, specialized in trauma and anxiety. They have experience with patients who have severe allergies. Lorna's eyes darted between us. You'd let me come back? After everything? Not come back, I said firmly. Start over. But only if you do the work. Only if you face what really happened with James and what you tried to do to me. And the baby? I touched my stomach again. Will know their grandmother when she's ready to be known. Really known, not hidden behind walls of control and fear. As we left the hospital, Everett took my hand. You're either the most forgiving person I've ever met or the most strategic. I thought about cycles of pain, about how revenge and healing sometimes look remarkably similar. Maybe both, I said. Maybe that's what breaking the cycle takes. Behind us, through the hospital window, I could see Lorna watching us leave, one hand pressed against the glass. This time, when she reached for her medication, she didn't wave the nurse away. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress over my now visible baby bump. The Vermont Treatment Center had called yesterday. Lorna was completing her program, and they wanted to arrange a supervised family session. Ready? Everett asked from the doorway. In his hands was a small box we'd received that morning from Lorna. I nodded, and he opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note. I found this in my mother's attic. It explains so much, maybe too much. The journal belonged to Lorna's mother, detailing her own struggles with control and fear. The last entry, dated just before her death, was an unfinished letter to Lorna. My darling daughter, I'm sorry for teaching you that love means control, for making you believe that protecting someone means owning them. She's breaking the cycle, I said quietly, touching the worn pages. Really breaking it. Walter met us at the treatment center, looking years younger despite the divorce proceedings. She's different, he said as we walked in. Really different. The family session room was bright, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Lorna sat already waiting, her hands folded in her lap. The first thing I noticed was her medical alert bracelet, identical to mine. I've been baking, she said after we settled in the center's kitchen. They have protocols for allergen safety. She smiled slightly. Turns out I'm quite good at it when I'm not trying to prove something. Mom. Everett started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I've learned something important here. She took a deep breath. Control isn't protection. What I did, to James, to you, Marin, to this family, it wasn't about keeping anyone safe. It was about not feeling powerless. The therapist nodded encouragingly, and Lorna continued. I found these in my mother's things. She pulled out a stack of letters. She did the same things to me that I did to you, Everett. Made me doubt myself. Used my weaknesses against me. Called it love. Her voice cracked. But it's not love. It's fear. I touched my stomach as the baby kicked. Lorna's eyes followed the movement. I'd like to be part of your child's life, she said softly. Not as the controlling grandmother who needs to fix everything, but as someone who understands what it means to be different. To need protection sometimes, but not control. We'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. But we need to know this change is real. It is. She pulled out another letter, newer. I wrote to Camille's brother. He's agreed to repay Everett what he lost in the investment scam. It won't fix what I did, using Camille to hurt you both, but it's a start, Everett finished. After the session, as we walked through the center's garden, I found myself alone with Lorna. She stopped by a bench, touching the medical alert bracelet. You know what the hardest part was? She asked. Accepting that you and I are more alike than different. Both of us changed our names, running from our past. Both of us living with invisible threats. Both of us. Survivors, I finished. Not victims. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I named him James because it means supplanter, someone who takes another's place. I was so afraid of being replaced, I nearly destroyed everything trying to prevent it. I took her hand, placing it on my stomach where the baby was kicking. This little one? We're naming her Hope. Later that night, as Everett and I lay in bed, he asked, "Do you really trust her change?" I thought about the journal, about cycles of fear and control, about how healing sometimes requires walking through the darkest parts of ourselves. I trust that she's trying, I said finally, and sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do. On our nightstand sat the last page of Lorna's mother's letter, its final lines hauntingly familiar. The greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's learning when to let go. The baby kicked again, and I smiled, thinking about names and changes and the future we were building, not despite our scars, but because of them. Some cycles, it turns out, are meant to be broken.
My name is Sarah. The events I'm about to describe may sound like something out of a soap opera, but they are all true. To me, they represent a past I'd rather not remember. It all began when I was approaching my late 20s. As those around me got married, I felt a growing sense of loneliness, as if I was being left behind. I was literally desperate to get married. Perhaps that made me somewhat blind to love. Anyone who would say they liked me was good enough. In this state of mind, I asked a friend at work if they knew anyone suitable. Not really expecting much. Surprisingly, they did introduce someone. Even a lawyer, a profession that many would envy. I'll be honest, the thought of dating a lawyer and the sense of superiority it would bring was appealing. So, I eagerly asked my friend to set it up. Nice to meet you, I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you, too. I'm Ryan. That was our first meeting. Ryan seemed like a nice, serious, and kind young man, exactly the type of person I wanted as a boyfriend. I assume you know, but I work as a lawyer. I'm just a regular office worker. I get a bit nervous talking to a lawyer. Oh, I'm not that difficult to talk to in my private life. In fact, I'm often told I'm too frivolous. Really? That's unexpected. I get that a lot. I assume you heard from a friend that I only graduated from high school. I really shouldn't be in a position to talk with a lawyer. Nonsense. Your educational background doesn't matter. Please, see me as an individual. Ryan. Thank you. You see, I couldn't go to university because of my family's situation. At the time, it didn't bother me, but once I entered the workforce, every time someone looked at the education section of my resume ending with high school and frowned, I realized the world wasn't so forgiving. However, Ryan said he didn't care about that, which made me genuinely happy. He was easy to talk to, had plenty of topics to discuss, and knew how to make me feel entertained. I enjoyed our conversations, and the atmosphere felt right. Is it this late already? Are you going home by taxi? Yes, that's the plan. Then, please let me pay for it. Oh, that would be too much. We've just met today. That's exactly why. What? Could we possibly meet again? I'll pay for the taxi now, and in return, please go on another date with me. I couldn't refuse. His words sounded like something from a soap opera, and my heart fluttered in a way it never had before. I mistook this for the beginning of love. After that, we began to meet frequently. Most of the time, Ryan initiated our meetings. Surely, he took a liking to me. I thought so selfishly. Here, would you accept this? What is it? Open it. I bought it thinking it would suit you. I hope you like it. Wow. It's a necklace from a popular brand. Yes. I asked the store clerk for a recommendation, and this is what they suggested. Thank you. I'm really happy. Good to hear that you like it. We were an ideal couple that anyone would envy. He was a lawyer by profession, kind-hearted, paid for all our dates, and never missed giving gifts. All my friends were envious when I told them about him. Perhaps I was a bit conceited in that environment. And it didn't take long for us to get married. Ryan proposed after we'd been dating for 6 months. And of course, I immediately said yes. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now I think getting married after only 6 months was too soon. We were probably only seeing each other's good sides, not even trying to see the bad. It was undoubtedly premature. Of course, everyone around us celebrated. I had friends who were envious, and I felt very good about it. Now newlyweds, however, I soon realized that this marriage was a mistake. Ryan, you're late again today? Yeah, there's a company party, so I don't need dinner. Okay. But we're newlyweds. I thought maybe we could spend a little more time together. What? What do you think I'm working hard for? That is, since you became part-time after we got married, our household income has dropped. So it's only natural I have to work, right? Yes, I really appreciate that. Then stop complaining. You just need to keep quiet and follow what I say. Okay, I'll do that. Since getting married, I quit my job and started working part-time at a supermarket near our new home. I had more time, and since my husband was a high-income lawyer, we weren't struggling financially. Everyone at my new job was friendly and easy to talk to. Yet, despite having more time and financial comfort, I felt a hole in my heart every day, feeling lonely. I doubted Ryan would understand even if I expressed this to him. Ryan used to understand me better than anyone else, and I could consult him about anything. I wonder when I started feeling the need to be overly cautious around him. Looking back, it seems to have started after we got married. After we officially became husband and wife, Ryan's personality changed completely. Could this be his true character? Had he been pretending all this time? Could it be that he revealed his true self only after making sure I couldn't escape by marrying me? Thinking this far, I was horrified. I should stop thinking such strange thoughts. It couldn't possibly be true for Ryan. To prove my thoughts wrong, I made an effort to express my feelings to him. Hey Ryan, would you like to go out to eat sometime soon? There's a place I've been wanting to try. Out to eat? Give me a break, I've been going out with my boss every day. I want to rest on my days off. You might feel that way, but I've been stuck at home. I'd like to go out to eat once in a while. Huh? Are you asking me to indulge your whims? Well, calling it whims. You don't have to say it like that. I just wanted to go out with you, Ryan. That's exactly what being whimsical is. You know, that's quite bothersome. Why would you say that? When we were dating, we used to go out to eat together and visit various places. Well, when we were dating, I had to bait the fish, didn't I? What? Haven't you heard? Men don't feed the fish they've caught. That's. I didn't care as long as I got a wife who would obey me. That's so, how can you say that? What's the problem? You have an easy job, and you're not struggling for money, right? It's not about that. I wanted to build a happy home together. Oh, I'm not interested in that. Ryan said this nonchalantly, waving his hand dismissively. I couldn't stop my tears. I had been deceived by Ryan all this time. It was wrong of me to be deceived, but this was too much. I immediately considered divorce. It hadn't been long since we got married, but I couldn't bear to be with such a person. Yet, I didn't have the courage to consult my friends or parents. After receiving such blessings from everyone, the idea of getting a divorce so quickly, I just didn't have the courage to tell them. Anyway, I proposed a divorce to Ryan. Ryan. I never thought you were this kind of person. Huh? What, you just realized this is my true nature and you're disillusioned now? Yes, I'm disappointed. Fortunately, we don't have children, and I want a divorce. Divorce? You, who works part-time, want a divorce? Yes. That's hilarious. How do you plan to live after divorcing me? When you've been living off my income? That's. You can't even consult your friends or parents, can you? If you leave me, you'll really have nowhere to go, right? That may be true, but being treated like a servant by you here is far worse. What did you say? Let's get a divorce, Ryan. I can't stay with you anymore. I don't want to. Is that so? If you insist that much, I'll grant you the divorce. But remember, you'll be the one crawling back to me, because I am a lawyer. Ryan insulted me, calling me useless and good for nothing. But I gritted my teeth and endured, handing him the divorce papers. His words were cruel but true. I had nowhere to go. I didn't want to worry my parents, and I couldn't tell my friends, who had blessed me so warmly, about this reality. Ryan was cold until the end. The moment I filled out the divorce papers, he chased me out, saying, "Get out now. You are a stranger to me." With few belongings, I quickly packed and was thrown out of the house. The next day, as if being chased away, I rolled my suitcase aimlessly, fortunate that it was still light outside. I have to work tomorrow, so I need to find a nearby hotel or something. Is that you, Sarah? Huh? I turned around to the sudden voice and saw my best friend Nicole, who had given the friend representative speech at my wedding. Why are you rolling a suitcase around? Don't tell me you ran away from home. Just kidding, though. Nicole. What? Seeing Nicole's innocent smile, I couldn't stop my tears and started sobbing. Sensing something, Nicole invited me, "Come to my place for now." So, what happened? You don't have to say if you don't want to. Nicole had always been this way. She seemed tough and brusque. But she cared about me more than anyone and knew how to read the situation. I loved Nicole for that. I was really happy when she celebrated my marriage. Thinking about that, I started crying again. You know, I might be overstepping, but is it about your husband? What? Did I hit the mark with that face? Yes, but how did you know? Well, it's just a hunch. But you know, that husband, Ryan, right? He seemed a bit shady from the moment I met him. Is that so? But I didn't say anything because you looked so happy. thinking it would be tactless to speak up. Maybe I should have told you. No, I probably wouldn't have paid any attention even if you had told me at that time. Yeah, that was highly likely. Thank you, Nicole. For what? I feel a bit better thanks to you. That's good. But, don't you have more you want to talk about? Yeah. For now, just stay over tonight. It looks like you ran out of your house without a place to stay, right? Thank you, Nicole. Nicole's kindness brought tears to my eyes again. She teased me about crying too much, but even that made me happy. And I ended up crying even more. Eventually, I cried myself out while she rubbed my back. While staying at Nicole's place, I searched for what I really wanted to do. Of course, while continuing to work part-time. I tried to pay the rent from my modest salary. But she wouldn't accept it until I earned a bit more. I thought hard about what I wanted to do, what I really enjoyed. Once I figured out my feelings, I planned to tell my parents about the divorce. By the way, Nicole. Yeah? Didn't you have a boyfriend? Is it okay for me to stay here? Oh, that's fine. We got divorced. What, you were married? Why didn't you tell me? I would have brought a gift. It was more like we just got married because it felt right at the moment. And it wasn't really a celebratory mood. That's so. And, as expected, we got divorced. It was good that I didn't bother mentioning it. That was why I thought maybe you had some worries. When I saw how down you were, Sarah. I see. But honestly, the divorce isn't finalized yet. He's not agreeing to it. I'm actually in the middle of trying to get it officially done. Is that like, you're in court? Kind of. He's demanding alimony, but I don't think I need to pay. I think so too. But he just won't accept it. So it's dragging on. Couldn't a lawyer settle this quickly? I thought so too, but his lawyer is quite skilled. Every time we go to court and it looks like we might lose, my lawyer quit at once. That's terrible. Well, never mind my story. Just relax. Okay. Learning about Nicole's situation, I started studying law in between my part-time jobs. Initially, I wanted to understand what she was going through. As I studied, I surprisingly found myself enjoying learning about law. The more I learned, the more engrossed I became, devouring books on law. I never imagined that this would significantly change my life. After a few years, I quit my part-time job. And Nicole was still in divorce mediation with her husband. However, our circumstances had drastically changed. Nicole and I were in front of the courthouse. Today was Nicole's 5th divorce mediation session. We entered the courthouse in suits, and the lawyer we had hired was already there. Hello, I'm Nicole. Hello, I'm honored to take your case. My name is Ryan. Huh? There stood my ex-husband, Ryan. I wasn't surprised, but Ryan seemed shocked to see me. Wait, what? Why are you here? I'm here because I'm Nicole's friend. I came because I was worried. You're accompanying a friend? That's funny. Ryan made a disdainful remark. Nicole looked upset, but I assured her with my eyes. I wouldn't expect a high school graduate to be here in court. It's so out of place. Oh, you might get sued. Let's not talk about that. Please focus on representing me today. All right. But you'll owe me a lot if we win. After all, it seems many lawyers have given up on this case. Ryan laughed crudely and entered the courtroom. We followed. Let's start by having everyone introduce themselves. I've already said this many times, but I'm Nicole's husband, Jason. And I'm his wife, Nicole. Let's review the reasons and circumstances for the divorce. Jason, could you start? Yes. Thus, the solemn divorce mediation began. The proceedings went smoothly. But it was clear that Jason's lawyer was formidable, and we were at a disadvantage. I didn't know before, but it turned out Ryan's lawyer skills weren't so great. He couldn't argue back, and he was sweating profusely. Nicole, who should have been the client, sighed. That concludes our argument. Considering the situation, I think it's fair for Nicole to pay the alimony. Understood. Now, let's hear from Nicole. Well, this is. Excuse me, Your Honor, may I have a word? What? As Ryan wiped his sweat and attempted to speak, Nicole quickly raised her hand. Surprised, Ryan inadvertently dropped his handkerchief to the floor. I apologize for the interruption during the trial, but I would like to change my lawyer. Huh? What? Legally, it is possible to change lawyers during the proceedings. But you will need to appoint a replacement lawyer. Yes, I am aware of that. What are you talking about? I would like to request that Ms. Sarah White, a law student here, take over as my lawyer instead of Mr. Ryan Baker. Huh? What did you say? Sarah is a law student. Wait, you want to appoint Sarah as your lawyer? Your Honor, is that acceptable? If both parties agree, I have no objections. Of course, I have no objections. The opposing lawyer looked at us as if watching something amusing, his gaze dripping with scorn. He must think that a mere law student couldn't possibly win against him. Wait a minute. I didn't hear about this. I am your lawyer. That may have been true, but it doesn't seem like you can win against him. Therefore, I'd rather ask Sarah, my most trusted friend. Do you even realize what you're saying? A law student defending is unusual enough. But to entrust your defense to a dropout like her? Yes, any problems? Of course there's a problem. Your Honor, let's adjourn this trial. Why is that? This woman is a high school graduate with hardly any brains. It's wrong for someone like her to even enter a courtroom. I can't let that stand. What do you mean? As it turns out, she is affiliated with one of the country's top law schools and has achieved the top academic honors there. What? Huh? She is fully capable as a lawyer. Certainly more than someone who judges others by their education. What are you talking about? This woman, top of her class. Now, let's proceed. Mr. Baker, if you have any issues, would you like to be excused from the court? What? Well. Ordered to leave, Ryan protested and caused a scene, which only garnered more disfavor from the judge. Eventually, Ryan couldn't say anything more and left the courtroom saying, "Do whatever you want." In cases where a student represents, a guardian is required. But the judge offered to take on that role. Unbeknownst to others, it was the judge who had recommended me for this position. He had recognized my talent as a law student early on. Although it might sound self-serving, I believe my ability to absorb legal knowledge is exceptional. Although I never liked studying much, I seem to be a different person when it comes to law. Perhaps my motivation to help Nicole also played a role. It was only later that I realized I also had a desire to become a better lawyer than Ryan. So, when Nicole chose me over Ryan and the judge revealed my true identity, I felt incredibly validated. The frustrations I had been holding back cleared up in an instant. When Ryan was leaving the courtroom, he seemed so small. I couldn't believe I had once loved such a man and had been manipulated by him. That made me incredibly angry. But for now, I needed to focus on the present. In the end, Nicole and we won the case. Surprisingly, it turned out that being a lawyer was my true calling. Nicole and I rejoiced, holding hands. This event quickly became news. The story of a law student defeating a skilled lawyer was unprecedented. And ironically, my educational background made it even more sensational. The headline read, "Your aspirations have nothing to do with your education." And I was featured in the media every day. Consequently, Ryan, who had looked down on me, also became news. Portrayed as the lowest of the low among lawyers. With such a label, Ryan was inevitably fired from his law firm. After such reports, reemployment might be difficult for him. One day, Ryan contacted me. "Sarah, I was wrong. I apologize. So, can you explain to the media? What I said about you was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding? What's misunderstood? Isn't it all true?" "Don't say that. Look, if it helps, we can get back together, right?" I'm astonished. "You really live in a fantasy world." "What? Goodbye. I don't want to see or talk to you anymore." "Wait, Sarah." I forcefully ended the call. It's been months since I last contacted him. And I don't know what he's up to now, but he's probably not leading a decent life. Nicole and I now live together in a sort of roommate situation. Free of the burdens we once carried, enjoying life more than ever. Whether we'll ever marry again, I don't know. But at least for now, the freedom we have is priceless to us.
"Mom, we need to leave, now," I said, voice trembling. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, my heart pounding with a sense of dread that had become all too familiar. "Honestly, Claire, I can't deal with your nonsense right now," she sighed, not even glancing up from her magazine. "You're always overreacting about something." I swallowed hard, the dismissal stinging as it always did. From as far back as I could remember, I'd had these inexplicable gut feelings, warnings that would scream at me to avoid certain situations or people. More often than not, they proved to be accurate, like the time I insisted we leave a restaurant only for a horrific kitchen fire to break out minutes later. Or when I pleaded with Mom to take a different route home, and we narrowly missed a multi-car pileup. But instead of being praised for my intuition, I was labeled as a troublemaker, a jinx. My parents brushed off my concerns, chalking them up to an overactive imagination or attention-seeking behavior. The only one who seemed to understand was my little sister Julia, who would cling to me whenever I sensed danger, her big eyes wide with trust. That trust slowly eroded as we grew older. With each passing year, the rift between Julia and me widened, fueled by our parents' blatant favoritism. While I was constantly criticized for my oddness, Julia could do no wrong in their eyes. She was the golden child, showered with affection and opportunities that I could only dream of. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom snapped, jolting me back to the present. "We're not going anywhere. Your sister has an important dance recital tonight, and we're not missing it because of your silly premonitions." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. It was no use. They never listened, no matter how dire the situation. With a heavy heart, I retreated to my room, the feeling of dread growing stronger with every step. Little did I know, that night would be the beginning of a downward spiral, one that would test the limits of my family's loyalty and push me to the brink of losing everything, including myself. High school should have been a fresh start, a chance to shed the labels that had followed me for years. Instead, the neglect from my parents only intensified, and the chasm between Julia and me grew wider with each passing day. "Did you see Julia's new outfit?" Mom gushed one morning over breakfast. She looks absolutely stunning. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy that twisted my gut. Of course, they had splurged on yet another designer ensemble for their precious daughter. "And her dance recital is this weekend," Dad chimed in, beaming with pride. "We can't wait to see her perform." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. They couldn't care less about my activities or accomplishments. Not that I had many to speak of. My parents had made sure of that, constantly shooting down any interests or hobbies I tried to pursue. "What about you, Claire?" Mom asked, almost as an afterthought. "Anything exciting happening in your life?" I opened my mouth, but the words died on my lips. What was the point? They would only dismiss or criticize whatever I said, as usual. "No, nothing," I mumbled, staring down at my half-eaten breakfast. Julia shot me a smug grin from across the table, her perfect features twisted into a look of pure disdain. She knew she held all the power, basking in our parents' endless adoration while I withered in her shadow. The months ticked by and the pattern repeated itself endlessly. Julia blossomed into a popular, confident young woman, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers and drowning in praise from our parents. Meanwhile, I faded into the background, my warnings and concerns falling on deaf ears. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom would scoff whenever I tried to voice my intuition. "Stop trying to rain on your sister's parade." The words cut deep, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a jinx, a burden to be brushed aside. Even Julia started to treat me with disdain, rolling her eyes whenever I opened my mouth. "No one wants to hear your crazy theories, weirdo," she sneered one day, her friends giggling behind her. I bit my tongue, swallowing the hurt and anger that threatened to spill out. What was the point of fighting back? They had already made up their minds about me. As the years passed, the isolation became suffocating. I watched from the sidelines as Julia's star continued to rise, her every whim catered to by our doting parents. They were blind to her true nature, the vicious jealousy that simmered beneath her perfect facade. Little did they know that jealousy would soon boil over, igniting a chain of events that would tear our family apart and force me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. The day Julia got scouted by the prestigious Westbrook Dance Academy should have been a celebratory occasion, but as soon as I laid eyes on the slick-haired recruiter, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "This is such an amazing opportunity," Mom gushed, her eyes shining with pride. "Julia is going to be a star." "I don't know," I began, but Dad cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't start with your negativity, Claire," he snapped. "For once, can't you just be happy for your sister?" I bit my tongue, the familiar taste of bitter resignation flooding my mouth. Of course, they wouldn't listen to my concerns, not when it came to their golden child. Over the next few weeks, the feeling of dread only intensified. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off about Westbrook, that their promises of fame and fortune were too good to be true. "Julia, please be careful," I pleaded one night as she packed her dance bag. "I have a really bad feeling about this place." She whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Shut up, Claire. You're just jealous that I actually have talent and a future unlike you." The words stung, but I pressed on, desperate to make her understand. "I'm serious. Those people seem shady, and I don't want you to get hurt." Julia let out a derisive laugh. "Oh my God, you're delusional. Stay out of my business, freak." With that, she stormed out, leaving me alone with my mounting sense of dread. Sure enough, my worst fears were realized. Within weeks, the truth about Westbrook began to unravel. They were nothing more than a glorified exploitation ring, luring in talented students with promises of stardom, only to bleed their families dry with exorbitant fees and shady contracts. "How could you let this happen?" Dad raged, his face contorted with anger. "You jinxed this opportunity for your sister." "I tried to warn you," I pleaded, my voice trembling, "but none of you would listen to me." Mom shook her head, her lips curled in disgust. "This is all your fault, Claire. If you hadn't been so negative and discouraging, none of this would have happened." The words cut deeper than any knife, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a burden, a blight on their perfect family. As the financial strain mounted, the tension in our household became unbearable. Julia grew increasingly resentful, her once bright future now tarnished by the failures of Westbrook. "I hate you," she hissed one night, her eyes burning with rage. "You've ruined everything for me, just like you always do." I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see reason. But deep down, I knew it was pointless. In their eyes, I would always be the problem, the one to blame for every misfortune that befell our family. As the walls closed in around me, I found myself retreating further and further into a world of isolation, my only solace, the knowledge that I had tried to prevent this catastrophe. But even that small comfort was overshadowed by the growing realization that my family's love and loyalty had limits, and I had long since exceeded them. As the walls of isolation closed in around me, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of Mrs. Reynolds, my English teacher. From the moment I stepped into her class, I sensed something different about her, a quiet understanding that seemed to radiate from her kind eyes. "Claire, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked one day after class, a warm smile playing across her lips. I nodded warily, bracing myself for yet another adult who would dismiss or belittle me. But Mrs. Reynolds surprised me. "I can't help but notice the way you carry yourself," she began, her voice gentle. "It's almost like you're shouldering a weight that no one else can see." My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered brushing her off like I had so many others. But there was something about her demeanor, something that made me want to trust her. "It's complicated," I finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have these feelings, these gut instincts that something bad is going to happen. And no matter how hard I try to warn people, they never listen." To my surprise, Mrs. Reynolds didn't laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I understand more than you know, Claire," she murmured. "You see, I have a similar gift, a heightened sense of empathy that allows me to read people's emotions and intentions." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Could it be possible that I wasn't alone, that there was someone else out there who understood what I was going through? Over the following weeks, Mrs. Reynolds became my mentor, guiding me through the intricacies of my abilities and helping me to embrace them as a strength rather than a curse. "Your intuition is a powerful tool," she explained one day, "but it's up to you to learn how to wield it wisely." With her guidance, I began to see the world through a new lens. The constant barrage of emotions and premonitions that had once overwhelmed me became manageable, even helpful. I started using my gift to assist friends and classmates, offering advice and warnings that were met with gratitude rather than scorn. "How did you know that Kyle was cheating on me?" my friend Sarah asked in amazement after I confronted her about her boyfriend's infidelity. "You're like a human lie detector." For the first time in my life, I felt seen and appreciated for who I truly was. The isolation that had once suffocated me began to fade, replaced by a newfound confidence and sense of purpose. But as my star rose, Julia's jealousy reached new heights. She sneered at my newfound popularity, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment. "Of course the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight," she spat one day, her words dripping with venom. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my abilities weren't a ploy for attention, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her own fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. As the tension between us escalated, I found myself caught in the crosshairs of a battle I never asked to be a part of. A battle for love, acceptance, and the right to be seen for who I truly was. Emboldened by Mrs. Reynolds' mentorship, I stepped out of the shadows and into a newfound confidence. No longer would I cower in fear of my abilities or allow others to dismiss them as mere delusions. "Claire, you have to help me," Sarah pleaded one day, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Kyle's been acting so strange lately, and I think he might be cheating on me." In the past, I would have hesitated, afraid of overstepping boundaries or being labeled a freak for voicing my suspicions. But now, I trusted my instincts implicitly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said gently, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "But I've sensed something off about Kyle for a while now. His emotions towards you have shifted, and I don't think he's being faithful." Sarah's face crumpled, but she nodded, grateful for my honesty. Word of my unique insights spread quickly, and soon more and more of my classmates were seeking me out for guidance. "Claire, You have to tell me if Brad is serious about me or just stringing me along, Amanda begged, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I closed my eyes, tuning into the emotional currents that swirled around us. He cares for you, Amanda, I said carefully, but he's not ready for the level of commitment you're looking for. As the requests poured in, I found myself embracing a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, my abilities were being valued, not shunned or ridiculed. But not everyone was thrilled by my newfound popularity. Julia's jealousy reached a fever pitch, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment and bitterness. Of course, the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight. She sneered one day as I offered advice to a group of classmates. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my intentions were pure, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. You're just jealous that people actually appreciate me for once, I shot back, my own frustration boiling over. Julia's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might strike me. Instead, she leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom. Enjoy your little moment in the sun, Claire, she hissed, because I'm going to make sure it doesn't last. From that day on, the battle lines were drawn. Julia made it her personal mission to undermine me at every turn, spreading rumors and lies in a desperate attempt to claw back the attention she so desperately craved. But for once, her efforts were futile. My newfound confidence was unshakable, bolstered by the knowledge that I was finally using my abilities to help those around me. As the tension between us reached a boiling point, I couldn't help but wonder if our toxic sibling rivalry would ever be resolved, or if it was destined to consume us both in a blaze of jealousy and resentment. You seriously think you deserve a seat here, Claire? Julia smirked as I took my place at the family table for her wedding reception. The venom in her voice sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to back down. Not this time. Of course she does, Mom chided, though her tone lacked any real conviction. She's part of the family. Julia let out a derisive laugh. Barely. We all know you've never really accepted her gifts. She made air quotes with her perfectly manicured fingers. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Julia, this is outrageous. Leave your sister alone, or I'll have you removed from your own wedding. I whipped around to see none other than Mr. Anderson, the father of one of my closest friends, striding towards our table. His stern gaze swept over Julia and her new husband, Rick, leaving no doubt as to his distaste for their behavior. Mr. Anderson, I stammered, equal parts relieved and mortified that he had witnessed Julia's cruelty. You didn't have to. Nonsense, Claire, he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. I would be remiss if I didn't speak up in defense of someone who has done so much for my family and this community. Julia's face flushed a deep crimson, her carefully crafted facade of perfection cracking ever so slightly. Rick, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. What are you talking about? Mom demanded, her eyes narrowing at Mr. Anderson. He smiled, seemingly unperturbed by her hostility. Claire's unique abilities have been invaluable to my business ventures. Her insights and intuition have helped me navigate countless difficult decisions and partnerships, saving me from potential disasters time and time again. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, mixed with a twinge of guilt for not sharing these accomplishments with my family sooner. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't have mattered. They were too blinded by their favoritism towards Julia to ever truly appreciate my gifts. Is this true, Claire? Dad asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I nodded, holding Mr. Anderson's supportive gaze. It is, but I never wanted to make a big deal out of it. I was just trying to help where I could. Julia's face twisted into an ugly sneer, her carefully curated mask of perfection shattering completely. Of course, she spat, always the martyr trying to make me look bad. That's enough, Julia, Mr. Anderson said firmly. Your pettiness and jealousy towards your sister have gone too far. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. With those words, he turned to address the assembled guests, his voice ringing out clear and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news to share about the bride and groom. As Mr. Anderson proceeded to lay bare the sordid details of Rick's shady past and Julia's manipulative behavior, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. For too long, I had been the scapegoat, the outcast forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction. But in that moment, the tables had turned. Julia's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, exposing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath the surface for years. And as the gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, I knew that this was only the beginning, the first step towards reclaiming my rightful place in a family that had long since abandoned me. As Mr. Anderson's damning revelations about Rick and Julia's sordid behavior echoed through the stunned silence of the reception hall, I could practically feel the weight of years of mistreatment and neglect lifting from my shoulders. Rick Thompson is nothing more than a con man preying on wealthy families like yours to fund his lavish lifestyle, Mr. Anderson declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury. And your daughter Julia was all too willing to be his accomplice, manipulating and deceiving everyone around her in pursuit of money and status. Julia's face had drained of all color, her perfect veneer cracking further with each word. Rick, meanwhile, seemed to shrink in on himself, the bravado he once exuded now replaced by a palpable sense of shame and fear. "You're lying!" Julia shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "Rick loves me, and we're going to be so happy together." Mr. Anderson fixed her with a withering stare. "Wake up, Julia. The only thing Rick loves is your family's money. He's been using you from the start, and you were too blinded by your own greed and desire for validation to see it." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a torrent of hushed whispers and pointed stares. For the first time in my life, the tables had turned. Julia was the one being ostracized, her carefully cultivated image of perfection crumbling before our very eyes. "And as for you," Mr. Anderson continued, turning his steely gaze towards my stunned parents, "you should be ashamed of yourselves for enabling Julia's behavior and alienating Claire in the process." Mom opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Anderson held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen firsthand how you've dismissed and belittled Claire's gifts, treating her like a pariah while showering Julia with endless praise and attention. Well, no more." He gestured towards me, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Claire is an extraordinary young woman whose talents and insights have helped countless people, myself included. She deserves to be celebrated, not shunned by her own family." As his words washed over me, I felt a surge of emotion. Gratitude, vindication, and yes, a twinge of petty satisfaction at seeing Julia's carefully constructed facade finally shattered beyond repair. For years, I had been the outcast, the black sheep forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction and cruelty. But in that moment, the tides had turned, and it was Julia who found herself on the outside looking in, her mask of perfection stripped away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. As the stunned silence gave way to a cacophony of whispers and murmurs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Finally, after years of suffering in silence, the truth was laid bare for all to see, and Julia had no one to blame but herself. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and held my head high, basking in the knowledge that my long journey towards redemption and acceptance was finally within reach. The path ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would never again allow myself to be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others. From this moment on, I would forge my own destiny, unburdened by the weight of my family's toxic legacy. The weight of the past fell away as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, my meager belongings tucked into a battered suitcase. The door closed behind me with a decisive click, severing the final ties to the toxic environment that had once been my home. As I made my way down the familiar street, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me to this point. The years of neglect and emotional abuse at the hands of my own family, the constant dismissal of my gifts, the unbearable strain of living in Julia's shadow, it all seemed like a distant nightmare, one that I had finally awakened from. The events of Julia's disastrous wedding had been the catalyst, the tipping point that had finally forced me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. With Mr. Anderson's support and my newfound confidence, I had mustered the strength to break free from the toxic cycle of manipulation and cruelty that had defined my relationship with my family for far too long. The confrontation had been explosive, a maelstrom of bitter accusations and long-festering resentments finally unleashed. Julia, of course, had been utterly unrepentant, hurling vicious insults and denials even as the evidence of her misdeeds mounted. "You're just jealous that I'm the one who's actually successful and happy," she had spat, her perfect facade now shattered beyond repair. Mom and Dad, meanwhile, had retreated into a defensive silence, their blind loyalty to Julia rendering them incapable of acknowledging the truth that had been laid bare before them. In the end, it had been a lost cause, a family so poisoned by dysfunction and favoritism that they were beyond redemption. And so, with a heavy heart, I had made the decision to walk away, to forge my own path and leave the toxic remnants of my past behind. As I navigated the familiar streets, each step felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The future stretched out before me, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences and possibilities. A small smile tugged at my lips as I thought of Mrs. Reynolds, the woman who had seen my gifts for what they truly were, not a curse, but a rare and precious talent to be nurtured and embraced. She had promised to help me find my footing, to connect me with others who understood the complexities of empathic abilities. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging, of being seen and accepted for who I truly was. No longer would I be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others, but by my own strength and resilience. As I turned the corner, the rising sun cast a warm glow over the city, bathing the world in a soft golden light. It felt like a fitting metaphor for the new chapter unfolding before me, a chance to step out of the shadows and into a future filled with potential and possibility. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and pressed onward, the past finally receding into the distance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was no longer alone in this world. For the first time in my life, I was free to embrace my gifts, to forge my own destiny, and to leave the toxic legacy of my family behind once and for all.